I didn't want this movie to exist. After the last two attempts at adapting the Death and Return of Superman storyline on the silver and big screen failed so miserably, I thought they would have cut their losses and stopped adapting this arc, as I stated before, was rushed out because the storyline of Lois and Superman getting married was delayed until the New Adventures of Lois and Clark show reached their wedding episode months later, and they needed something to replace that story until then. However, since this year marks the 80th anniversary of Superman, Warner Brothers decided to try their hand at adapting this storyline in the form of two films. The first being released this year that covers the events leading up to Superman's death, known as The Death of Superman, and the second being The Reign of the Supermen, which will be released next year. Now, if you saw my review of the Superman Doomsday, you'll know that I was not a fan of that adaptation or story, so you can imagine that I wasn't too happy when I heard this film got announced, and I had thoughts it was going to be terrible, despite splitting it into two movies, potentially removing that pacing issue, and as it turns out, I was 100% wrong. This isn't a setup for a joke or anything like that, I am being genuine. I actually kind of like this film, and if anything, I think it's the best adaptation of this part of the storyline in movie form thus far. Note how I said this part and not the entire story because, as I said earlier, second half will be adapted and will release next year. So what made me come to this crazy conclusion after trashing this story in the past? Well, let's find out. The story of this film is roughly unchanged in terms of the core events. Doomsday comes to Earth, fights Superman, and they both quote-unquote die. However, while the core events are unchanged and Doomsday is still as interesting as ever, what I really appreciate about this story is the small additions they made to it. Unlike, say, Superman Doomsday, we see a lot more moments with Superman and Clark being both a hero and good person to his friends and family, as well as Lois, who has the most chemistry with and development as we see their interactions together, which comes off as decently handled and written, as well as his issues telling her the truth about his identity, and keeping secrets from her and the path that arc goes on, which is admittedly quick, but not to the point where it becomes poor pacing, which eventually culminates in him telling her the truth when it comes time for him to die. The death in her arms feels a lot more emotional and better handled than in Superman Doomsday, because we saw their interactions and relationship build up in this movie, and they made me care about these two on screen. It's not perfect, and I would have liked to see them hook up on screen instead of off screen, same with them breaking up Wonder Woman and Superman off screen, I mean, what the hell, but I think it still works despite those faults, and it's an element I do appreciate. Now, my favorite scenes of these two are the scene at the restaurant/bar and the scene with them and Clark's parents, because it not only showcases their chemistry pretty well, but it's also a nice quiet scene after all the carnage shown previously with Doomsday's rampage earlier on in the film. This is something I appreciate over Superman Doomsday, because instead of focusing on compressing the two parts together, this film takes its time getting to the big fight, while also giving us scenes of Clark as Superman, as well as other heroes and characters and his interactions with the others, like I said earlier. In other words, this film's version of Superman, as well as Lois, feels more like developed characters than in Superman Doomsday, and maybe even the original storyline, if that was your first story with these characters, or the first one after you stopped reading about him. They have their strengths, their weaknesses, their moments alone together, their chemistry with other characters as well as each other, and ultimately that is something I can appreciate with this version over, again, Doomsday's attempt at it. Yes, I know it's unfair to compare the two since one was trying to adapt both parts, but ignoring the fact that they didn't need to adapt both in one movie, it's still an adaptation that came out years prior nonetheless, and it's still inferior when compared to this film as well as the original story, especially in the character department. Even minor characters like Bo Bavowski and the Kents had some good moments on screen, especially with Clark and Superman. Examples include, but are not limited to, the scene at the beginning where Bo and Superman interact, the scene where Bo looks after his patrons and tells them they can stay there for a bit as the fight with Doomsday is going on destroying Metropolis, and, again, the scene where Lois and Clark are having dinner with Clark's parents. These were touching or nice scenes to watch, and it was able to keep my interest throughout, which I do like. Also, Clark in this scene totally stole my look. Absolutely no one else wears black shirts, has glasses, and blue eyes. Basically, this film did a good job making me, the viewer, care about Superman, and considering that this year is the 80th anniversary, that is really good to see. Even the pacing was handled pretty effective this time around, slowly building up to the big fight between Superman and Doomsday by having us start off with Small Fry, then work his way up to the Justice League, and then finally lead into the big fight with Superman, while also having the quiet/lighthearted moments to help make the serious moments all the more serious, and also give us more on the characters or the world this film takes place in. Like the story, it's not a perfect pace, but it still does a good job getting from point A to point B in its 81-minute runtime, and leaving me very satisfied and excited to see how the second part of the original story gets adapted. Hell, even Lex Luthor gets something to do in this film compared to Superman Doomsday, as we see his workers creating Superboy, and he even gets a little action in the climax as he fights Doomsday for a bit before ultimately getting subdued by him. Hell, he even looks more intimidating than Doomsday, and especially BVS, and I could actually take him seriously this time around because of that design, and even his voice, which while not my favorite voice of the character in the animated movies, was still able to deliver a pretty good and even threatening performance at points in this film nonetheless. Certainly more than Eisenberg. Actually, well, on that topic, can I just say that the voice performance is pretty solid in this as well? Inside of the returning voices from the other DC movies in the last couple of years, we have Jennifer Hale as Ma Kent, Max Middleman as Jimmy Olsen, and even Paul Eading, the voice of Grandpa Max from Ben 10, as the voice of Paul Kent. And all of them turn in pretty good performances. Though now I have this funny idea of Pa Kent dressed like Grandpa Max, and Jonathan Kent Clarkson in DC Rebirth dressed like Ben 10. My crack fiction aside, I also think the animation's pretty good. It's fluid, pretty, and while I don't like the design of the New 52 suit for Superman, the animation can be choppy at points, the rest of the character models and animation overall do look pretty good, especially Lex Luthor's design and even Doomsday's to an extent. Hell, compared to Doomsday, the music is definitely a lot less forgettable in this version, since they realized that it was stupid to constantly reuse the Superman theme, decided not to do that in this movie, and as a result, the rest of the tunes have a lot more time to shine, and honestly, they're not that bad on their own, and when used in the scenes they're in. That being said, this film isn't perfect. I'm not a fan of the ending where they sequel bait incredibly hard by showcasing Superman's tombstone opened up and the guy flying away as well as showing off the other Superman. I'm also not a fan of Doomsday, and sadly he has not been all that updated / given more depth in this version outside of his design to an extent. And even then that's tiny. Yes, I know that was likely the intent, he was basically an event to signal the end of days, but given how this film paints him as the main antagonist in this first part, I'm going to treat him like one, and I'm sorry, but like I said in my Doomsday video, I prefer my villains to have personality and better writing to them. I know some people like that, and more power to you if you do, but I'm not one of them. Is the fight at least good? Yeah, I think so. We see Superman Doomsday's strengths, and still has good moments for Superman as he's saving lives on top of him fighting this creature, and it's decently paced, as well as having good fight choreography and energy for the most part. I also know that some reviews have stated their issues with doing the story for the third time in a row, and while I do get that complaint, I think they did the best job they could with this story, or at least this part of the story when compared to the other two attempts in recent years, those being Doomsday and BVS. It has better pacing, better characters, and it has a much better tone than BVS did. It has those dark moments, yes, but it knows when to take a freaking break and when to ease the tension by throwing in a lighthearted joke / scene or something fun afterwards. Yeah, maybe the third time they did this story, but if they're gonna do this story again, I'd at least hope they do it right this time, and going off this first half, I think they succeeded in that. Is it a perfect movie? No. It has its cracks that I established a moment ago. But for those who've never seen an adaptation of the storyline before, yeah, I'd recommend it, especially if you're a Superman fan. I'm still not a fan of the original story, and I will hold my judgment on this adaptation as a whole for after I see the Reign of the Superman movie next year, but in terms of this part of the storyline, I find it to be the best adaptation of the story in recent memory. So that concludes this review. Thank you all for watching, and see you next time.
Now! Die! Black Lanternot! Black hole explosion! What? But I thought it... You thought wrong! No, not now! Not now! So that's it. You got cocky and used up all your energy on me. Too bad. Oh! No, I'm not done yet. Ah! Right, scream. Scream, you piece of shit. Did you really think you could seriously kill me? Me? I am the one trying to save all of you from those beasts, those monsters, those defects. And this is how you repay me for all that I have done? Now, die!
That was for my husband and all the people you've killed. Rot in the afterlife, you filth!
Each of my fingers contains a code for various purposes. Scouting, torture, etc. I also contain the myths of cats having 9 lives. Perfect for killing defects like her. While I've used up numerous lives over the years of hunting them, it's still handy for a situation like this. So, any last words, reject?
Yeah, I am defective. But I can make just as much of an impact as them regardless of this handicap. They gave me that chance. They gave me hope. They made me happy. They are my family too. We've had our ups, our downs, our unions, and funerals. But the one thing that has always remained inside of me is one color. One color that has conquered rage, sorrow, and even death. And one that still partially remains, even after the cores were gone. Violet.